Hello everyone, I wanted to provide this screencast just to provide some audio feed as you go through this assignment. And this is one of the signature assignments. It's where you're actually going to be the SPTA and take somebody through one of the three balance tests, one that you chose. It will be either the Mini-BEST, Berg, or the Dynamic Gait Index from what you selected in week 3 before you went to clinic. And if you haven't selected your balance test, I think there's just a few open slots, I believe, with the Mini-BEST, which is actually my favorite test. So what the overall goal is just to show proficiency, that you can competently and have the skill to take someone through a test to assess fall risk. And each one of these tests has their own value. I think it's important to know, and you learned this in 204 last fall in lab in particular, that the Berg is more static. There is some movement, there's some head turns, there's some turns in space and reaching, but overall it's a fairly static test. So it does not assess gait readiness necessarily. It certainly can be a predictor whether a person's going to fall when they transfer and whether or not they're safe to get up on their own and to transfer. Traditionally, the Berg is not a tool that therapists use if someone is still heavily dependent on a walker. It is more commonly used for someone that is using a cane because those individuals will score higher and will be more appropriately determined to be less of a fall risk. Certainly if someone is not using a cane and you think they are a fall risk and not using a walker, then a Berg would be an adequate or a good intervention to consider with the conversation with your PT, especially as new graduates. Whereas the Dynamic Gait Index, that the tool is more likely going to be used someone who is walking and whether to determine if they should continue to be a community ambulator. In particular, the person that maybe has no assisted device, that has a report history of falls, especially while walking, somebody that you've observed to be at increasing fall risk when they're walking into the treatment room, or someone in the retirement community, such as where I work, that is seen as a higher fall risk, or you've observed them being very unsteady when they're walking. So it could be time to assess that person to see if they need to have an assisted device, which could be a cane or, in a more severe case, a walker. And it's also a good test to use to see if someone is safe to go back home using a single point cane. Again, it's not a tool that's used for people that are using a walker because they will score very low. I don't think it's not appropriate to use with somebody that's using a walker. But certainly it can be a test done with someone without an assisted device. And it's really, I think, an opportunity to really observe somebody doing stairs and stepping over obstacles and doing real quick turns and doing some dual tasking, which includes walking and turning their head. I think the Mini-BEST is one of my favorites. I think there's so much evidence about it and its appropriateness to be used for at-risk populations. Earlier in this lesson, I talk about the Mini-BEST as a tool and chatted up quite a bit. And Faye Horak has done just a lot of work, in particular, traveling and putting on workshops on the validity of the instrument, and there's been some good research to support it. Now, going back here, you can see where we talk about earlier in this lesson builder about gait training, static and dynamic balance activities, DME. I closed that up after manual therapy. Maybe I'm off a little bit here. Let's find that again. Just had it. Just the kind of little bit of evidence I threw out there on the tool, and particularly the Minibest as an instrument, and why it's being seen more and more, here we go, as somewhat of the higher level test, certainly, because there's so many components to it. And again, with that additional body of research to support it, I think there's a lot of richness to it. So there's some links about the Minibest. Certainly use that for your own, everyone to look at it and to gain a better appreciation on it. I think it'd be really good to have that as one of your tools in your toolbox, so to speak, that you can administer the Minibest because of the research that supports it. And there's research that supports the Berg and the dynamic gait index as well, and that's part of the assignment, is for you to find an evidence-based practice article that either supports one of these tests or perhaps even does not support the test. So you have screencasts on each one. You have a link on how to score each one, a scoring sheet. So what you're going to do at the very end is you're going to go to your Google Doc, or the Google Doc that I created, and use that as a tool to look at the rubric and how I'm going to score them. And so let's look at that briefly. This is also in the lesson builder itself. I think the great thing too is that you have videos showing therapists administering these various tests. So, red flags are, pretty apparent. You got to wash your hands, show evidence that you washed your hands, like you did with skill checks before, and that you respect the person you're working with, even if it's a classmate or a friend, that you use person first language. You guys all do this really well. You practice good body mechanics, and that you correctly put on the gait belt and have it there because you're working with somebody who presumably is seeing you because they are a fall risk or maybe a fall risk. And if something happens during your balance session, you're going to work hard to correct and prevent a fall. So preparations have everything that's necessary for the equipment. This is accurate testing equipment that is consistent with what's being demonstrated and what's being called out in the lesson builder to show adequate preparation for the treatment or the intervention. I think you all will do really well with this, but it's just kind of to remind you the importance of turning in a product that is shows demonstration of your competence, and part of that is good, effective communication. The skill is worth half of the points if correctly going through and in sequential order administering the test or the assessment and scoring that assessment correctly. At the end, correctly determine if they are fall risk, or what their score is and where they fall into that, whether it's a concern or not, according to the instrument's scoring rubric. In the documentation regarding the validity of the measurement, you notice I don't say, when I say validity, I don't say that shows it's valid. If there's an article that shows they're not valid, let me know, and then I rate the level of evidence of the article cited, whether it's level 1, 2, 3, or 4, and 205 lab, and certainly when you've had other courses, you've seen this pyramid of evidence that is a hierarchy. The higher levels of evidence, or towards the top, would be a level 1, and the lower level of evidence would be more like a 5, 6, etc. All right, I think that's enough for now. I look forward to your submissions. You will submit these in Moodle under the assignment. Along with your submission will be your actual video. You do not need to submit your scoring sheet. You need to be telling me what your score is. If you want to send your score sheet in, a copy of the Berg tests on paper, that's fine. But just like the demonstration, they're actually telling the viewer what this person scored, whether you scored a 4, 3, or if you're doing the mini best, it would be like a 2 or a 1, right? So, but at the end, you got to tell me what your score is you came up with that individual patient on these various categories. If you're stuck, by all means, let me know. I look forward again to seeing these assignments. It's the third year I've done it, and every year they seem to be getting a little bit better because I think I'm just learning as I go along and putting together, I think, even a stronger rubric. I think this year's is especially strong. And I'm really excited about including the mini best this year as well. All right.